Okay, we're halfway there. I can hear myself too, which is good. And there we are. Okay, so we are starting again. Thank you for that. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming today to my talk about community management. My name is John Rickne, but as I mentioned earlier, we're talking about internet stuff, so you can know me as Totally Moo, and that's with one L, because I can't spell as an 11-year-old Swedish kid. I work for Paradox Interactive. I've been doing so for roughly 3 years now, doing community development, which is kind of a made-up title by us, but it's community manager, but a bit more on the development side. So I do stuff like forums, social media, YouTube, just random marketing stuff, things that help our community grow, and just, I like to consider myself a gardener, in a sense, and an internet gardener. Today I'm going to talk about community management, what we have learned at Paradox over our years. As the company started roughly in the late 90s or the early 2000s, depending on how you want to see things, we have had a very long-standing community, and we have had a lot of people that have been with us since then, meaning that we, of course, learned a lot of lessons. So this is going to be a highly subjective talk. As you can see here, I'm saying it's the totally nonsensical pseudoscience of how to talk to people, because there's no science behind this. This is just opinions. These are just things that we have learned. So with no further ado, I'm going to go right into it. First of all, let's define gaming communities. They're not as any other community. They're not as any other consumer of a product. They're not people that love Ferraris. They're not people that love a certain book, because these people require constant attention. Games are no longer products that you buy and forget and move on. They're services. They're things that you always interact with. They're things that you go back to every day, and not only just play it, but you live it. You have this really close relationship with the product that has never existed before, and this has created an entirely new market for communities. This has created an entirely new concept for communities, because before this, of course, there have been some things like arts and books especially that has had a very close interaction between the creator and the fans, but nothing so intimate as the gaming world, which means, of course, that it presents unique challenges. We get support. We have to deliver support. We get feedback. We have to respond to feedback. And this is not just feedback as in I'm throwing out a comment on your Facebook page, but this is feedback where some kind of response is expected. And this creates very, very unique challenges. And also, this is very, very unique for the gaming world, but the costs are so low. You can buy a game for $5, $10, and you can expect support for years to come. And if you don't get that, that's going beyond or under the standards. Because if you buy a $5 app and you complain on the App Store and no one responds, you feel like you've been cheated. You feel like you got in something that it's not good enough. And this is just mentioning another industry. It's like comparing if you go to a restaurant and you buy one meal and you expect to get back every day for the lapse of a year and get the same meal because, well, you invested in this company. You put your money there. You deserve it. And there's nothing wrong with this. Absolutely not. This has created a wonderful sense of community that is one of the strongest forces in the world right now. And as I mentioned here, it's internet plus crowd mentality equals a force to be reckoned with. And that is a very definite fact that you should never overlook. The internet is a swift and powerful force, and you should never, ever underestimate your customers. Also, as I mentioned earlier, there's no buy and forget here. Your reputation will stay forever. The internet is an archive where everything can be found. Whatever you say, it's going to be there. Even if you remove it, someone's going to have screenshotted it. If you do a bad move, no one is going to forget about it. And you're going to need to do 10 times as much on the good side as you need on the bad side. So this is extremely important to consider when you're working with a community, because of a lot of the people that come into community management, that come into marketing, that enter the gaming industry from the outside world, say they've been working in movies or, I don't know, anything, just online marketing. They could have been working for a social media company for all I know, but they don't know that this is just this incredibly different challenge that you have to approach in a very different way. So once again, everything I'm saying here, it's just the lessons that I have learned personally, and of course my company to some sense. So, Paradox, how do we do it? We like to believe that we have our own approach to communities, how we interact with our customers, because we like to not consider them as customers, or at least hope that they don't consider themselves as customers more than fans, because fans are very different. A customer, you have to convince them to buy your product. You have to market them until they believe that they want to buy what you're selling. A fan will go out of their way to find your product, to buy it, to spread it to people. A customer is very upset if you do a tiny mistake. A fan can have a lot of patience with you because they know that you come out in the end and you do what you do best. You are the company that they, of course, start loving from the start, so they have faith in you. And this is incredibly important for us because, well, we're a mid-sized company, but we are, of course, growing very fast, so we want to expand our user base without having to spend incredible amounts in marketing and trying to force our way into this just huge market of gamers. We also have something we call the Paradox lifestyle, which is something that we started working with a lot more on later years because, as I mentioned, our company has grown immensely since the success that was Magica, Europa Universalis 3, Crusader Kings 2 especially. A lot of newer games that have made our company just exponentially explode in manpower. And that means we also need to have a culture around us, or, well, we want to have a culture around us. So we have the Paradox lifestyle, because you don't only play Paradox games, you live them. You interact with us on our forums. You talk about us with our friends. If you play the PDS games, you're going to want to talk about history with your friends. You're going to be like, oh, well, I was playing Europa Universalis 4, and I did this totally really weird history thing. And you do this outside the medium of games. You don't do this in the platform that we deliver, but you actually live Paradox. And this is something that we're expanding to with merchandise, with music, with just all of these new ways to interact with us as a company and become part of us as a company, because we want our fans to feel like they can really belong with Paradox. We want our fans to be able to come to talk to us and be like, well, I know you intimately because you are a Paradoxian, which is a word that I'm personally very fond of. I think it's kind of like comrade, but it's our own twist on it. How do we do this? Well, for starters, we believe that we set the tone of discussion. And this is not only in the forums, but mainly there, because there's a lot of people talking here. We have hundreds of thousands of active members in our forums. They've been active for many, many years, but of course, there are a lot of veterans here that kind of, well, they decide what the tone is, but we have set this from the very start. This is not only via moderation, via saying, you can't say these words, or being hard-handed, but we actually set the tone of discussion by behaving the way we want others to behave. It's kind of the mentality of do unto others as you want to do unto yourself, but in a very, very broad spectrum. And this is something that any community can do, but you need to be very, very concise and clear in how you do this. Because if you just open up a forum and you invite people and you're like, well, you have these rules to follow, you have these guidelines to act after, but you don't really tell them how to act, they're going to start acting, I'm sorry, but they're probably going to start acting like jerks. Because people do this if left unchallenged. But we at Paradox set a very positive tone of discussion. And this is when a role like myself comes in. When we start a new community, we have a dedicated person on that community that takes care of them. It might be 3-4 people talking in a tiny forum about a tiny budgeted game. But who knows? It might grow into something ridiculously big. It might be the next Minecraft. And if we don't interact with them from the start and tell them, this is how we want you as a community to be, well, then we're going to have no power over them, because when they're 10,000 people, they're going to be more powerful than us. We're just going to be the victims of how they act. Sure, we might be able to try to go in and change things, but, well, it's not going to work. It might just change things slightly. It might make it a bit more rough, but it's the most probable scenario is that they're going to start a new forum. They're going to go away from us. They're not going to be part of us. So this is a power you have. We also believe in honesty and transparency. And this, of course, sounds like buzzwords to you because, well, who doesn't want to be honest and transparent? But for us, it's more of we want people to know that if we do something, we are going to be very upfront about it. If we do a mistake, we are going to own up to it. If we do a business decision that is controversial, or, well, the exact opposite, if we do a business decision that is just insane, we decide that we want to release a highly anticipated game, then of course we want to involve people in how we do this. And this doesn't mean we'll have everything in your business open on papers and show everyone exactly how you do things. It means, well, just talk to them, do announcements, tell them, okay, this is how we reason, this is how we're thinking, this is kind of how it looks at Paradox. And it might come out after a year, it might come out instantly when you do the decision, but as long as you have a history of being transparent, people will know how to trust you and to trust you. And this is incredibly important, because we live in a world where a rumor can spread in just a few hours. It can explode our entire internet. And if people know that Paradox are going to be honest, we're going to just own up to our mistakes. Say this, in the start of this week, I accidentally gave 650 people a free game because I sent out a message saying, well, if you complete the survey, you're going to get this kind of new game for free. And well, let's just say I got some crap for it, but we actually owned up to that and gave these people these games, even though they might have bought them in the end. But these things, even though they might be costly at times, builds a very strong community around your company. We also have something that I like to refer to as positive segregation, which is that we release a lot of games. We release strategy games, we release action games, we have mobile titles, we have Magica, we have Europa Universalis, we have a lot of games with a lot of different communities. And as you've probably seen, and sometimes when communities mix and match, it's not a good idea, especially not if they're vastly different or if they're very defensive about their product, or in our case, when we have people playing Crusader Kings on one side and Hearts of Iron on the other side, they might still like the same genre, but their games are so vastly different that it's going to be a catfight if they get together. So we've chosen to let people register their games on our forums, and they can only participate in discussions in forums where they register games. Meaning that it's kind of like Steam hubs, but you have a bit less control, as in you actually need to own the products to access that forum. And people might see that as splitting people or splitting hairs, but I see it as us positively trying to let people that are like-minded and interested in talking about the same thing actually be with each other, because otherwise they would just spread all over, be all over. We are also extremely involved in what happens in our forums, in our community. We have a very clear feedback loop. When we take feedback, we don't want it to just end up there and people are like, well, we told you this, but what happened with it? Did you even listen to us? For example, earlier this week, we had a stream where a famous YouTuber called Aromba had given us 12 kind of tips/opinions on how he'd want us to change our games or our interface in our games. And we did a stream where we openly answered his questions. And this is super easy to do. This is incredibly easy to do. It's super low effort from us, but it gives the sense of customer feedback, of a loop where they can expect us to respond in the end. And finally, we live what we learn. And this comes back to the Paradox lifestyle, where we really want to be the company that people see us as. If we are kind from the outside, we want to be kind inside too. We want to be very Paradox in ourselves. It's basically that, because that is incredibly important if you actually want to be able to do something properly of this. So why do we do things our way? Well, for starters, we get an incredibly loyal core community. We have people that have been with us for 10 years. We have people that have been with us for as long as we've existed, or even before this. We have, for example, on our forums, maybe a year back or so, there was a blind person that wanted to play one of our, probably CK2 or U4, one of our grand strategy titles. And for those of you who don't know, this is a game where it's a big map, and you rule a country or a person, and it's not like you can just play it without watching, because there's tons of information, there's tons of just things that you need to take into consideration. So he posted on our forums, and what happens? Well, a guy says, well, we can do play sessions. You can go to Skype with me. I can look at your screen via screen sharing, and I will tell you everything that happens. And then you do the decisions, and I play for you. And they do this pretty often. And this is what happens when you have such loyal and tight core community. They want to help themselves grow. They love each other so much that they want these things to happen. And in the end, we sent the guy a braille map, so a blind map, so he could actually see what's happening to kind of in his own sense. And to my knowledge, roughly 1.5, 2 years later, they're still playing together. And this is something that it doesn't really happen if you don't have a very core community. We also get returning customers. We have people that buy our games simply because there are games. We have people that invest in our titles not because they're super interested or because they really want it. They give us the benefit of the doubt and actually go and invest in a title that they might not even like, or just do it to support us because they love what we do in another sense. And this is incredibly important for a mid-sized company as us, because of course we need that extra revenue. And of course it helps us grow our communities. We also get organic marketing. I work for the marketing department. When I started working there, we were maybe 6 people. We're starting to get to 12, 13 now, but we're still relatively seen a very tiny marketing department. We don't have that brawn that bigger publishers have. We can't have a huge display on Times Square with our games. We can't have TV ads because, well, we could theoretically, but that would be our entire marketing budget. And we'd rather spend our money developing and actually perfecting the games we do above just talking about them and then having no real end result. So we need organic marketing. We need people to talk about our games. And people talk about things they like. People talk about things they have positive experiences with. People don't want to share when they're, of course they want to share when they're angry, but that's not really going to end up in sales for us, is it? But we really need our fans to like us so much that they want to talk about us outside our sphere of influence. If we share something on Facebook, we need them to continue sharing this. And this power we get from just having this loyal Paradoxian core fan base. We also get incredibly powerful feedback. And when I'm saying powerful feedback, I don't mean that it's power level high, but it's actually feedback that we can use. It's not vague. It's not, well, I think you should improve the aim of your game, or the graphics are bad, but it's actually something that we can use in development. So for example, a lot of the historical data in our games, the historical research that happens behind our games are from fans. We have just tons and tons and tons of fans scrutinizing every tiny little aspect of our games. So we can get, like, if we meet people at events, we can have people come to us and be like, well, if you play Europa Universalis in the year 1559, this part of the map is slightly to the left. And they're talking about some tiny province in the middle of Europe. Because we have such a dedicated fan base that they look at every tiny detail of our games and give us feedback on this. For example, War of the Roses, which was a title that we did recently, we had a guy named James Elmsley, that's an English swordsmith, also very well-known historian in this period. And he just loved the game and the concept so much that he helped us out for years on the detailed historical facts of this game. And some people might see it as, well, you're doing free labor, but it's not really that. It's just that people are so invested in our games that they want to get involved as fast as possible. And this kind of feedback you get from people that like you. And, well, this is going to be a very returning part, is that people should like us. People should like you, your company. If you're working with community, you want people to like you. You don't want people to be angry when they think about you. You want people to be like, that game I played the other day, I like the game and I like the developers. They're good guys or girls. We also have a clear and shared company mindset, and this is something that I talked about last slide. We want the people in Paradox to feel like they are parts of what we do. We want people to feel like they are part of our company culture. We want people that work for us to not be just this monotonous crowd of just the same people. We want them to feel and think and, I don't know, ethnicized the same. I don't know if that's even a word in English, but we have a very shared company mindset. And of course, we recruit after this mindset, but we also want people that don't really know what it's about to be able to start working for us and instantly feel like, okay, so everyone in the community and in the company basically act the same. So we have a very, very shared mindset. We also have what I like to call the Paradoxian funnel, which is that we funnel our users into Paradox. Not as in we have trainee programs or anything, but we have a lot of employees that started out as community members. So for example, we have Martin Onward, who is currently the lead developer for Europa Universalis, who started out as a modder in our community. So back in the day when we had Crusader Kings out, he looked at the game and he said, well, I'm not very happy about a lot of things in this game. And he was very active on our forums, and he was very active on Something Awful forums, and there was a lot of talk about this. And it was kind of a match between our lead developer, Johan Andersson, who is now studio chief, saying, well, if you think you can do it better, then do it better. And he evolved a mod called CK+, which was better. So after some time of this getting a lot of popularity and people saying, well, this is a great product, people basically, so our forum and Something Awful kind of forced Paradox to employ him because he was a great guy. He was a skilled person. We wanted him on our team. And this is something that happens a lot. I bet that probably more than 50% of the people working in Paradox development originally started out as very active community members, either or as modders or active posters, or someone that just interacted with us a lot, because these people are then the people that when we put up just job interviews or job opportunities, these people are going to be the ones that just say, I want to do this, I want to work for Paradox, because they're already part of us. And when they start working for us, they already feel like home. So we have a funnel of people. We have people playing in our betas. We have a lot of betas, just hidden small technical betas where we take feedback from people. And these core users, I'm just saying, a lot of them end up working for us, which is, of course, incredibly fun. Feedback. This is something that you will have to deal a lot with in community. You're going to get a lot of feedback. And it can be very difficult to know what you're going to do with feedback, because you might be a smaller company that hasn't really dealt with feedback before. You might be a huge publisher, and you're seeing tons of media against or for you that are calling out for changes in your game or changes in your practices or whatever it may be. And it's incredibly hard to know how to handle feedback. So we have something we call the hidden community. If you look at a lot of games, there might be a lot of controversy around them. Let's look at a recent launch. Destiny, as most of you probably know, had mixed reviews at launch. People thought it was a great product. People thought it was a lot of positive things, but I'd still say that the reviews were relatively lukewarm. Then you might think, well, okay, so is Destiny a bad game? Do people hate it? No. No. A lot of people bought that game. Latest I looked at stats, 3.2 million daily active users play Destiny, and the average playtime is 3 hours a day. And this is from a game that had lukewarm reviews, and basically the internet said, oh, it's so bad, no one should buy it, no one's going to play it, it's a total flop. But no, it's incredibly good. But there's just a very, very loud minority talking about the game in these forums, in these channels, in media, and these are the people that are upset. But generally speaking, the upset people are a minority. Of course, you need metrics and data to support this, because you can kind of judge whether or not it is a minority or not. But generally speaking, if you have a very loud, angry community and the game still works and people still play it, this is because the game is good and there's just some people that are upset about tiny details. Another example is a game that I worked for, War of the Roses, which was very similar. We had, it's a multiplayer-only title, meaning that, of course, you're going to have a lot of balanced discussions. You're going to have a lot of discussions about, well, it's a historical title too, so historical accuracy and all these tiny details. And we had just a few users that posted so much feedback on our forums and channels regarding how wrong things were and how horrible this and that was. But still, there were a lot of people playing the game. So we started to take a step back and said, okay, this feedback is overwhelming. We want to listen to it. But when we actually look at it, 95% of the players that are playing are happy with this. They think this is fun. They think this is enjoyable. So we could have acted on that feedback, and that would have probably shot us in the foot in the end. So it's very important to look at your hidden community. And then we come into how to value opinions. And this is just a short point, but you really need to consider whose opinions you value. Do you listen equally to everybody? Do you check how much they've played, many hours they played? Do you check whether or not they like your game? You can kind of stalk users a lot now, so you can find their Steam reviews, you can find their game time, you can have metrics in the game, and a lot of these things lead up to you having kind of a picture of your users. And you really need to decide, as a company, as a community manager or someone working with a community, you need to decide who to listen to. And that might end up in saying, I'm not going to listen to anyone. Or you might decide, well, I'm just going to go with the sway and put up polls on our forums and ask people to decide things for us. But this is something that you really need to define, because if you start deciding that, okay, I'm going to listen to whoever talks on my forums, well, then you're going to do a change. Then the other crowd is going to be upset. Then they're going to be more loud. Then you're going to change after what they say. And, well, it's just going to be a cycle of upsetting two sides back and forth. Should you even listen? This is also a very good question. And I have an example that I consider relatively recent too, which is Mass Effect 3. Another great game. It launched. It got mixed but very positive reviews, but there was a big controversy around the ending of Mass Effect 3. People were not happy about the ending of the game. And now we're not talking about a few upset people. Now we're talking about a very, very large and very, very dedicated fan base being majorly upset. And BioWare actually did a good thing in the end. They actually decided, well, you're right. This wasn't the best of endings. We think it could have been improved. And they decided to release an updated version of the game with an improved ending. And this is a very good case of should you listen or not, because there are a lot of games where the scenario has been just the same. People are super upset about something. But it's not actually the best idea to own up to that mistake, because of course you have something called artistic integrity. You want your product to be yours. You have to decide, am I doing my game or am I doing theirs? Who am I actually designing for? And once again, I have a few examples from the industry. We have The Forest. I don't know if anyone here has played that, but it's a early access game currently out on Steam, made by two guys called SKS Studios that have been developing for several years, and they have done this incredibly fun survival game. And it's a platform. It's really a platform, because now that they're out in early access, they just get tons and tons of feedback, and they just get so many thoughts from everyone, like, okay, add these things, do these changes. And this is a case where they should actually listen to the community, which is what they're doing. They're great guys, because they do updates bi-weekly, I think, and a lot of those updates are majorly around what the community has asked for. They added tree houses, which was something, as far as I know, that they hadn't even thought about, but there was such overwhelming feedback asking for this that they decided to. So this is a case where you should really listen to your community. But then on the other hand, we have an older example. We have Star Wars Galaxies, which was a great, great MMO that had a very interesting fan base and a very interesting gameplay element, whereas to get to the point of being a Jedi, I assume that everyone knows the Star Wars universe. Jedis are not common. They're not just something everyone can be. You can't wake up one day and be like, well, I want a lightsaber. I want to use the Force. There was actually a very, very complicated process to get to the point of being a Jedi in this game. And you could play as a civilian or a smuggler or so many other things. It was a vast universe, and there were so many options. But yet there was this crowd saying, well, we want to be Jedis too. We don't want this to be to RNG. We don't want to, fall victim to someone else's luck or have to wait for months and months and then maybe get to this point of the game. We want to be Jedis too. So the developer said, well, okay, we're going to let you be Jedis. It's going to be really easy now. What happened? Everyone got a piece of the cake. It wasn't really fun anymore. Jedis weren't cool anymore. And the game started in a kind of long decline that ended up in them having to shut down. And it's universally looked at as that's the turning point of the game, when they decided to listen to the overwhelming feedback. So this is a case of where they should have kept their artistic integrity, in my opinion, and just kept on doing what they were doing, because there's always going to be people that are not happy with what you're doing. So how do you gather feedback? Well, I have two favorite examples, which are early access and betas versus paid marketing. And these are the two most common ways to do it right now. So we have the very, very common thing of early access and betas nowadays, where people have kind of this development product and they're like, oh, well, you can come in and play it, or you can try it out for some time, and then you get tons of feedback, and then you act upon that, and then you do it in stages or whatever you want to choose to do. But this is very exhaustive for your funds, and this can actually end up hurting you. So on the other end, we have paid marketing, which is where you give out information about your game. You give out videos, developer diaries, you do live streams, you show certain aspects. And this lets you control the information, but on the other hand, people don't have the hands-on. So if you are, say, an indie upstart company and you want to decide, okay, so what format am I going for my game? Well, this is just to say early access and betas might not always be the best idea. Always look at your product and think, okay, so if I give you this, well, if I give you this multiplayer game that is bare bones and has one weapon and one map and no textured faces, and you fall through the floor every time you walk somewhere, then of course you don't want to put it out to people. If you have a single player game that is a story experience, then of course you don't want to put it out to people, because then you don't want them to play through the story 17 times before you actually get to the retail product, and they have lost interest. Because when you're at launch, of course, you want people to talk about your game. You want that big bam explosion, and you want people to start getting into it and building a community around it. So then, of course, you should look at paid marketing. But on the other hand, you might have multiplayer titles that are just they're good enough on their own feet, and they can just grow continuously. Or, as I mentioned earlier, we have The Forest, which is a game that's just, it's great in its current form. Minecraft, another great example, when you have just this platform that you continue building on. So how do you actually manage a community? Well, in my opinion, in the words of Bruce Lee, you have to be like water. You have to be reactive. You have to be kind of this force that involves them, that's around them, that acts with them, but not ever against them. If they push in one direction, you slowly follow them and kind of just try to be this force field. So to describe it, we have the third law of physics, which is that if a force gives a counterforce, right? Well, with the internet, it's kind of worse. A force grants a very, very, very much larger counterforce. So looking at another recent example, we had Jim Sterling, a big YouTuber, did a first look at a game called The Slaughtering Grounds, which was a early access title, or I actually think it was a release title on Steam. And suffice to say, he wasn't very pleased with what he saw. It wasn't a review. It wasn't really a bashing of the game. It was his honest look at the game. What the developer should have done is taken that feedback into consideration, maybe given a response saying, well, thank you, or something along those lines. But what they did was they released a counter video where they wrote over his review, let's just say, life-denying facts. So they were very, very non-receptive to feedback. And this went back and forth a couple of times, and then they started getting feedback on their forums, and then they started banning their forumites. And this just accelerated into an internet hate machine towards them, resulting in, let's just say, horrible sales and a non-existing community around the game that was actually, it looked to have a pretty decent ground and could have been something. But they decided to try to go against their community, to try to go against their players and attack them back, and this never works. So as a community manager, you're a gardener. You're not even the same species as your community. You take care of them. You help them with their needs. You help them arrange things. If they ask for something, you do your best to give it back. You give them water, of course. You really just help them grow with as little interaction as possible, because you don't want to harm discussion. You don't want to harm feedback. When someone talks on a forum and they talk with another player of the game, say you're talking about a very specific aspect of balance, and you come in and you're like, well, I think this sword is a bit too strong. And someone's going to come and, of course, argue against you, because the internet will argue about anything. And it's going to go back and forth, and you might end up in a very good resulting feedback, or you might end up in a shitstorm. But you don't really know that as a developer. But if you come in and the third or fourth response, and you say, well, we think this sword is equally balanced, you kill discussion right there. They have no thing to talk about because you went in there, asked this very powerful being that they probably respect in some way or form, and you just ended the discussion there. So when you post, you need to post very consciously. You need to be either very vague, or you need to know that, okay, my post is going to result in this, because you have a lot more power as a developer than you might ever imagine, or as a community manager or marketer or whatever. Also, very important to note, is that response creates expectations. If you respond once in an active forum thread, you might spark discussion, you might end it, you don't know. But if you start going back and forth, if you start actually going down to the grassroots level of conversation where you're talking with one user back and forth, this creates expectations. So if you suddenly find yourself in an awkward position, if they ask you something that you don't really want to answer, well, you done goofed, because they're going to expect you to answer. If you just cease talking, you just put yourself in a lot worse of a seat. So when you go into discussion, when you talk with someone, when you talk to a fan or a customer, know that you create expectations on their end. And this can be in a very small scale to a very large scale, depending on your project. But this is also something you always need to have in mind. So finally, a few pointers that I think are very important. And these are just, once again, my personal experiences that I have learned from. So you should take this with a grain of salt. Do's and don'ts. Do. Own up to your mistakes. This is very, very important. And this is what I talked about before. If you accidentally promise something, if you do a patch that breaks the game, if you do just a horrible marketing move, if you up your game 15% in price and then do it 15 down again, like a certain game did recently, then own up to it. Don't go into denial mode. Don't start rage tweeting. Don't start just denying your mistake. Actually own up to it, because that is going to help you in the length. And I am telling you, people are going to call out on your bullshit. It never works. You can't trick the internet. Live what you learn. This is something we do at Paradox, and this is something that I believe everyone should do everywhere. You need to know that if you talk to someone in a nice way, and that's actually a very bad example for that. Basically, live what you learn. You don't need to explain that more, to be honest. Be transparent. This is very, very important, especially for smaller developers, because say you're doing a two-man indie game that looks super great, but plays kind of meh. Don't deny it. Don't try to wrap a turd in golden saran wrap and be like, well, this looks really good. It's not a turd at all, because you need to be transparent about what you do and what you say. Always try to do this. And I'm not saying involve people in your tiny business decisions or anything like that, but just try to your best to be transparent. Create and maintain a format. This is mostly about setting the tone of discussion on a forum. Once again, you should decide how you want your community to look, and you should try to maintain that format of community. So if I want a rabid bunch of very, very passionate but also very easily upsettable pro gamers in an eSport title, well, I decide this and I go with this format, but you should be the ones that create and maintain this. Respect your players. Well, this is once again, it's kind of the above points concised into one. Always just try to respect the people playing your game, because they're the ones making sure you have a salary. And there's no good thing to come from being bad towards them. Remember your goals. Once again, this doesn't have to be explained too much, but just always try to go for what you initially looked after. If you're changing your goals, then remember to actually sit down and change your goals, not just go into a random tangent and then realize, oh wait, I completely changed direction here, and I didn't really even think about it. And also, be vague. This is something that is very, very important when you're a larger company, because we live in an ever-changing world. The internet looks different every day. So if you say something and you're not 100,000,000% sure that this is going to be the case in every tiny little detail, then be vague. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt to say, instead of we are doing this, say we're aspiring to do this. For example, back in the day, we were giving, Paradox were giving refunds for a title that didn't do so well, Sword of the Stars 2, we wanted to be able to refund our users. So we went down and said, hey, everybody, you're getting refunds. Then we realized, well, we're working with a lot of online retailers, and we don't really know how their refund policies work. And it kind of became a really big struggle, and it took us months to actually achieve this goal. So if we would have gone out and say, of course, it created controversy, but if we would have gone out and said, well, we aspire to give you refunds, it would have been a lot easier for us to say a few weeks after, well, it's going to take a bit longer than expected, but we're still aspiring to do it, because then people can't hold you against your word. Now we're coming to the don'ts. And as you can see, they're very much opposites of the do's. Don't lie to your customers, ever. Never, never lie to them. There's no sense in that. And as mentioned, they are going to call you out on your bullshit. If they ever figure out your lie, how tiny it even might be, they're going to call you out on it. They're going to screenshot it. They're going to create a lot of drama. And it's never worth it. So that's a really good thing to have in your mind. Don't promise things you can't keep. Once again, same points. Just try to make sure that if you promise something, and promise in the internet world is saying something without saying that it's not a promise. So be very careful about that. People are going to hold you up to it. Don't underestimate passion. If people love your product and they've played it for years and they just adore it completely, and then you suddenly change it, or break it, or do whatever. It might be a game that you just update to be free to play, or you do a balance-breaking patch, or you rescope it. These lovely, passionate people might turn against you, and they're going to use the exact same energy, the exact same passion to bash down. And this is very, very dangerous. So even if you have people that you think love you right now, if you screw them over, they're going to be equally mad at you. Don't fight the trolls. And this is kind of a two-sided coin, because I personally believe that trolls is probably the biggest resource that you have accessible as a community manager. Trolls are people that are willing, in most cases, to invest an insane amount of time in creating a bit of internet humor on your community. And I'm not talking about the trolls that are actually destructive, but the ones that are kind of semi-humorous or just a bit disruptive. Don't fight them, because that will just turn them against you. Try to work with them. Try to talk to them. It might be that they're just having complaints. It might be that they're bored. It might be something completely different. But trolls are actually, in the end, they might actually end up being your most valuable resource. They might want to be the biggest tester of your game, or be a community manager, or whatever it might be. But don't fight them, because that will just make them worse. Don't tweet when you're not sober. This is just important, but I've seen it happen so many times. And please just keep off social media when you're upset or when you're drunk, because you don't do good things. That just has to be said. Don't overhype expectations. We're once again going back to don't sell a turd wrapped in gold and saran wrap, because people are going to see through that. And even if you might get really good day one sales, I'm telling you, day two sales after you got into feedback are going to be horrid. So don't overhype something. It never, ever works out. And once again, and this is something that I think is the most important thing of all to take from here, don't invade discussions. If you talk to people, have a clear goal, make sure you're not ruining something, because it might just end up in something a lot greater if you don't get yourself involved. And finally, don't listen to me. These are all subjective experiences. I've been working with the Paradox community. We are a strange age group. We've been around for ages. We have really odd and specific games. We do the grand strategy genre. I bet a lot of people don't even know what that is. I've had a lot of experiences with my community, but it might look completely different. So please just take everything I've said as pointers, as experience, as things that I have learned, and try to take that into your own community, because otherwise you're just going to end up in a carbon copy of Paradox, and it might not work for you at all. And that is extremely important, because every community is different. And that will be all. Thank you for listening.